You think the worst pain a man can feel is betrayal. You imagine it as a sudden discovery, a shocking moment where the truth explodes into the open and everything collapses at once. But the real agony is rarely that dramatic. The real agony is slower, quieter. It's lying next to someone who no longer belongs to you emotionally and not knowing it yet. It's kissing lips that may have already kissed someone else, holding a body that feels strangely distant while convincing yourself nothing has changed. Most men never realize how often this happens, not because they are blind, but because they desperately want to believe the story that keeps their world intact. They tell themselves her distance is just stress, work pressure, fatigue, the slow routine of long relationships. They build explanations the same way a man builds a wall against a storm, hoping it will hold. But deep down, something inside them already feels the shift. Because the truth about human relationships is this: people rarely confess betrayal, but they almost always reveal it. Not through dramatic admissions, through small changes, tiny signals, quiet shifts in behavior that whisper long before anyone speaks the words out loud. And when a man ignores those signals, something dangerous happens. He doesn't just miss the truth, he slowly becomes a silent participant in his own humiliation. He stays calm when he should question. He smiles when something feels wrong. He reassures himself when his instincts are already sounding the alarm. And over time, that self-deception becomes more painful than the betrayal itself. Because the deepest wound a man can carry is not being deceived by someone else. It's realizing he deceived himself. That he felt the change, he sensed the distance, he noticed the signs, but he chose comfort over clarity. That's why understanding these patterns matters. Not so you can become paranoid, not so you can walk through life suspicious of every small behavior, but so you stop betraying your own instincts. Because when something shifts in a relationship, the change almost never appears all at once. It begins quietly, in places most men overlook. The first signal doesn't come through arguments. It doesn't arrive through accusations. It shows up somewhere much more subtle, in the silence of the body. There is a kind of silence that doesn't come from words. It comes from touch. When you've been with a woman long enough, you learn the language of her body. You know the difference between routine contact and genuine desire. You know when her kiss carries warmth, when her hand reaches for you naturally, when her presence feels open instead of guarded. But you also know when something inside that rhythm disappears. At first, it's small, so small that you question your own perception. You lean in to kiss her, and she turns her face slightly, not rejecting you, just redirecting the moment. You place your hand on her shoulder in bed, and instead of relaxing into the touch, her body stiffens. She tells you she's tired, and tiredness is believable. Everyone gets tired. But something about the moment feels different. Because exhaustion has weight, but it doesn't create distance. Indifference does. And indifference has a very particular feeling. It feels like touching someone who is physically present, but emotionally somewhere else. Most men try to explain this feeling away. They call it routine. They call it aging. They call it the natural cooling of long relationships. But attraction doesn't disappear simply because time passes. Attraction fades when it finds a new direction. When attention, curiosity, and desire begin flowing somewhere else. And when that happens, something strange occurs. A woman doesn't come back to you with the same hunger. She comes back satisfied. Not necessarily emotionally fulfilled, but temporarily satisfied enough that the spark you once felt between you grows quiet. Imagine trying to light a fire that has already burned somewhere else. You strike match after match, but the wood stays cold. Not because fire no longer exists, but because the flame was already spent elsewhere. This is the moment where many men make their biggest mistake. They chase harder. They give more attention, more affection, more effort. They believe if they try harder, the warmth will return. but effort cannot reignite desire that has already shifted. In fact, chasing usually deepens the silence, because attraction doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to space, to presence, to emotional clarity. That's why the strongest move a man can make in this moment is not begging for closeness, it's observation. Instead of chasing the distance, he steps back and watches what happens next. If the connection is still alive, she eventually reaches back, the warmth returns, the silence breaks on its own. But if the distance continues to grow, if the silence becomes more comfortable than the closeness once was, then the body has already spoken. And when the body stops speaking to you, the truth rarely stays hidden for long. Because if her touch has gone quiet, something else will soon begin speaking louder. Her habits.
When the body goes silent, the habits begin to speak. And habits are much harder to fake. Because while words can be rehearsed, routines usually reveal what a person is trying to hide. One of the first places this truth shows up is in something that seems completely harmless at first: cleanliness. Not ordinary cleanliness, but a sudden, almost obsessive ritual of erasing. When a woman has been somewhere she doesn't want you to know about, she rarely walks back into your life carrying the evidence openly. She arrives looking refreshed, too refreshed. A shower that happens immediately after coming home. A perfume you've never smelled before. Clothes changed quickly without explanation. Underwear swapped in a way that doesn't match the rest of the day. On the surface, it looks innocent. Self-care, hygiene, normal behavior. But psychology is not about isolated actions. It's about patterns. And patterns reveal intention. You see, the human body carries stories. Skin absorbs scent. Hair keeps traces of contact. Fabric remembers where it has been. Most people understand this instinctively, which is why when someone is hiding something, their first instinct is to erase, to wash, to spray, to change, to replace. Not just the evidence, but the feeling attached to it. This is what many psychologists refer to as a cleansing response. It's not always conscious, but it's powerful. A person who feels guilt often attempts to restore internal balance by removing the physical reminders of what they've done. They wash the skin, change the clothes, apply perfume, create the illusion that nothing unusual ever happened. And here is the irony. The harder someone tries to erase something, the more noticeable the change becomes. Because when behavior shifts suddenly, the human mind notices it even if it doesn't want to. But most men silence that observation. They tell themselves she just wants to feel fresh. They convince themselves she's trying a new fragrance. They laugh it off and move on. Not because the explanation makes perfect sense, but because the alternative is uncomfortable. Facing the possibility that something deeper is happening requires courage, and courage often arrives later than denial. But if the ritual begins repeating, if it always appears after unexplained absences, if the pattern becomes predictable, then ignoring it becomes a choice, not a misunderstanding. And once you notice that pattern, another shift often begins appearing right beside it. Emotions start changing. Because guilt has weight, and people rarely carry that weight quietly forever. Eventually, it spills out, but rarely in the way you expect. Most people assume guilt would make someone softer, more apologetic, more withdrawn. Sometimes that happens, but often the opposite appears first. Irritation, sudden criticism, unexplained tension. You walk into the room and something feels different. The greeting is colder, the tone sharper. Small things that never mattered before suddenly become problems. You loaded the dishwasher wrong. You forgot something minor. You said something harmless, but now it becomes an argument. At first, it feels confusing, because the reaction seems bigger than the situation. But psychologically, this shift makes perfect sense. When someone carries guilt, they face an internal conflict. Part of them knows what they did. Another part of them wants to protect their self-image. And that internal conflict demands resolution. One way the mind solves that tension is through projection. Instead of feeling like the person who betrayed the relationship, they begin convincing themselves that the relationship deserved betrayal. Suddenly, your flaws grow larger in her mind. Your mistakes feel heavier. Your presence becomes easier to criticize. Because if you become the villain in the story, then she no longer has to feel like one. It's a psychological defense, not always conscious, but extremely common. And this is where many men fall directly into the trap. They try to defend themselves. They explain. They argue. They debate every accusation as if logic will fix the situation. But logic rarely defeats emotional guilt. The more you defend yourself, the easier it becomes for the other person to continue shifting blame. Soon the dynamic changes completely. Instead of questioning her behavior, you find yourself trying to prove you're not the problem. You begin walking carefully around conversations, avoiding conflict, adjusting your behavior just to keep peace in your own home. And slowly, without realizing it, you surrender your emotional ground. But there is another way to respond, and it requires something most people struggle to practice: stillness. Instead of reacting to every accusation, you pause, you listen, and you observe the pattern rather than the argument. Because when someone is projecting guilt, their frustration often reveals more than their explanation ever will. A calm response exposes that tension, not through confrontation, through clarity. You don't need to fight every battle someone invites you into. Sometimes the most powerful statement is quiet recognition. A simple, calm sentence. Something like, "You seem angry about something deeper than this." And then, silence. Not aggressive silence, not passive silence, but grounded silence. The kind that refuses to participate in emotional chaos. That moment does something interesting. It breaks the script. Because projection only works when someone accepts the role assigned to them. The moment you stop defending yourself, the dynamic changes. Now the discomfort has nowhere else to go. It returns to its source. And once that happens, another layer of truth begins to surface. Because even if someone controls their words, and even if they manage to shift the emotional conversation, there is one place where the truth becomes harder and harder to hide: the body itself. And the body, unlike stories, rarely lies for long.
The body has a strange relationship with truth. It can cooperate with deception for a while, but never forever. Words can lie easily. Stories can be rearranged. Memories can be edited. But the body carries instincts that are much older than logic, and those instincts reveal themselves in ways people rarely control. One of the clearest places this happens is in sleep. Most people imagine sleep as a moment of rest, a time when the mind finally quiets down. But psychologically, sleep is often when the mind loses control of its filters. During the day, we monitor our expressions. We choose our words carefully. We adjust our tone, our posture, our reactions. But sleep removes that control. The subconscious begins moving freely, and sometimes it speaks. There are moments when a person will whisper names while dreaming, names that never appear during the day, names that slip out when the mind no longer remembers it is supposed to stay silent. Sometimes it's just a murmur, sometimes a clear word. But when you hear a name that doesn't belong to your life, something inside you immediately notices. Your rational mind may try to dismiss it. Dreams are strange, after all. People say random things while asleep. But instinct does not react randomly. If something inside you freezes for a moment when you hear it, that reaction comes from a deeper place than conscious thought, a place designed for survival long before modern relationships existed. Our ancestors depended on noticing subtle changes in behavior. The tribe member who suddenly acted differently, the hunter who began hiding food, the partner whose attention drifted elsewhere. Missing those signals could mean danger, and although the world has changed, those instincts remain inside us. Which is why a single whispered name can echo loudly in the mind of someone who hears it. But even this signal alone is not proof, because life is complex, dreams are chaotic, and human memory is unpredictable. The real clarity always comes from patterns. One unusual moment can be coincidence, two may be curiosity. But when signals begin aligning with each other, the picture becomes harder to ignore. A sudden emotional distance, strange irritation, cleansing rituals, defensive behavior, unexplained attention shifts, and then the subconscious whisper. Each piece alone is uncertain. Together, they begin forming something clearer. But here is the most important truth, and the one many men struggle to accept. Recognizing these patterns is not about controlling another human being. It's about controlling yourself. Because the Stoics understood something modern relationships often forget. You cannot command loyalty from another human being. You cannot force someone to feel love. You cannot guarantee devotion. Trying to control another person's choices is like trying to control the weather. But you can control your response. You can control your dignity, your calm, your awareness, your refusal to betray your own standards. And that is where real strength begins. A man grounded in emotional discipline does not panic when he senses something wrong. He does not explode with accusations. He does not collapse into desperate pleading. He observes. He gathers clarity. He remains steady while the truth reveals itself. Because desperation clouds judgment, but calmness sharpens it. This is the essence of Stoic masculinity. Not coldness, not indifference, but composure under emotional pressure. A man who understands this doesn't need to chase answers aggressively. Reality always exposes itself eventually. People reveal their intentions through time, behavior, and patterns. Your only responsibility is to stay clear enough to see it. And if the truth one day becomes undeniable, the response is not revenge, not chaos, not emotional collapse. The response is quiet strength. You step away with dignity intact. Because a man who respects himself understands something deeper than temporary pain. He understands that loyalty, forced through fear or control, is not loyalty at all. Real loyalty exists only when someone chooses it freely. And if someone chooses otherwise, the most powerful move is not chasing them back. It's walking forward without them, calm, clear, and completely unshaken. Because in the end, the true measure of a man is not how tightly he can hold someone who is drifting away. It's how gracefully he can release what no longer belongs in his life, and continue walking with his head high and his character untouched.